Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of our research symposium. It's been wonderful. We have Jennifer Hudgins here, who's almost done with her. She's almost Dr. Jennifer Hudgins. If you just got on, we had technical difficulties with our first presenter. So Jennifer has volunteered to switch slots. So she's here to do her presentation first. And she's going to do a lot of introduction of herself and her project. So I don't want to do that, but I do want to set the context that, in fact, I asked her to do something a little different in this presentation, and she happily agreed, and that was to focus on her process. She did an ADP, an applied doctoral project, instead of a dissertation. And that has its own ups and downs. And of course, doing any doctoral project has its ups and downs. And so I asked her to focus on that, and particularly on the ADP part. So without further ado, I present to you Jennifer Hudgins.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. I appreciate it. As Dr. Stein mentioned, my name is Jennifer Hudgins, and I am so close to being done with this process. I am in the PsyD Health and Wellness Psychology track, and I have recently gone through the AVP process. For my work life, I get to be an organizational development specialist for a large healthcare system here in Colorado Springs. And what I get to do for them is create programming that helps our associates and our leaders grow and feel safe and connected in the workplace. My passion lies in programs that have to do with building support, especially social support with peers. Some of the programs that I've had the opportunity to make this past year include a physician peer coaching program, which I'll share with you more about soon because that's what I did my ADP on. I've also made some mentoring programs that assist our newly hired associates by connecting them with other employees who have been at the company for 6 months or more to help them feel connected and grounded. And that has been fantastic because we've improved retention and been able to grow some leaders in the process. I'm also working on an engagement program that pairs our leaders who are doing really well in our annual associate surveys with new leaders and leaders who might be struggling in some areas to help coach them through to increase engagement across our system. And lastly, we're developing an Aspiring Leaders program that helps give tools and resources to those in non-leadership roles who are looking to grow and develop within the company. The goals for my session today, as Dr. Stein mentioned, are to share with you some of the personal challenges and growth opportunities I gained during this ADP process, and to share with you what each of those steps look like for me. And then to also touch base on some additional challenges that life brought along the past year and how I was able to overcome those by calling on some support. And then I'd like to share those tips with you in hopes that they will bring you some comfort and guidance as you go through the ADP process. So what I thought my ADP process would look like was pretty much a Disney musical. I thought I've done all this coursework. I'm passionate about my potential topic. It's going to be like dancing in a field with birds chirping and butterflies, and it's all going to be rainbows. I've got this. This is super easy. No trouble ahead. But what I actually got was a really deep journey of self-discovery and growth opportunities. There were a lot of ups and downs that I was warned about and told about during different courses along the way, and I just didn't think they would apply to me, and they really did. So there was a lot of awareness, lots of leaps of faith, some call to action, calling on mentors for myself, figuring out ways to renew my own energy when feelings of burnout came along, and facing negative feedback, and just how I was able to go through this journey to get to the point I'm at today. So one of the first steps in the ADP process is putting together a committee. So your committee consists of your chairperson, a committee member, and then an MR who gets assigned to you. And when I was originally going through this process, I wanted to pick people who I got along with really well. So I started looking at, in addition to the list they give you, teachers that I had really connected with along my journey in school. And I was able to connect with Dr. Stein, who chaired my project, and Dr. Davis, who was one of my planning instructors. And so once that was approved, I had my team formed together. And for me, that process went fairly quickly. And I was thankful to have their support so we could move forward. Talking about my project and getting excited about it and taking next steps. And that next step included putting together the PJT, or the project justification template. And for me, that form, I had already had some ideas in mind of what I wanted to do. And that was to have a program made that would help physicians coach each other through times of stress. And I thought it would be great to do this project, come up with a program for them, put it into action. And then my project was going to be about testing this program, collecting data, and seeing if it really worked to use peer support to help with things like burnout. So once that was all written down and gone through my committee and tweaks were happened, we submitted that and it was approved, and I was able to move on to my next step, which was a proposal review. And that's when you turn in your fairly completed drafts of chapters 1, 2, and 3. And I remember in my residencies, where I happened to meet Dr. Stein, she said some really key things that I held on to. And part of it was not to get stuck in the mud of chapter 2, because it's really easy to get lost in all the research and to keep adding more and get kind of muddled. And I didn't think that would apply to me, and it really did. I struggled with chapter 2 a lot. It felt really daunting with the roughly number of pages needed and the number of references. And it took a lot longer than I thought to narrow down research and then to read all of the articles, keep everything organized, and not lose track of my goal during that process. Chapters 1 and 3 were a little bit easier for me. So what I ended up doing is working on those and coming back to chapter 2 again after I'd completed 1 and 3. And I was able to have a clearer picture of what I was going for and have the appropriate articles and research to complete that step. The next step was that preliminary oral defense. And I was actually really, really nervous for this. I'm passionate about my topic, and I love my committee, and I know they've got my back and they have my best interests in mind, but I was really nervous to present to them. It felt like a long amount of time to speak about something. And even though I was the expert on my topic, I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome and that maybe I didn't belong. And I was questioning myself and who was I to be doing this work. And I had a couple of conversations with Dr. Stein, and it was really helpful to regroup and ground myself. And what I ended up doing is creating a PowerPoint to support my preliminary defense that was very interactive. And it included some media clips and some other things in addition to traditional slides and graphics that made it more interactive. And I felt a lot more comfortable doing that. Once I went through that process and we were able to regroup and debrief at the end, I got some very valuable feedback on things that were going really well, and then some options for growth that I could do for my next presentation, as well as to improve my project. So I took that feedback to heart, and I was able to move on to the IRB, and that submittal went pretty quickly. I'd worked with my committee a lot prior to that to make sure all the requirements were met, and that went through. Then came the process of doing my final review and finishing up those other chapters. And that was challenging because there was so much work that was going into everything for this process. And I'll share with you some of the challenges that came along, but part of what I went through and everybody this past year was the COVID-19 pandemic. And that really challenged me in my project, and I had to shift gears as to what I was doing. So instead of being able to create this program for physician peer coaching, put it into action, and have time to collect data, we were no longer allowed to meet in groups. And so I couldn't make my project what I originally set out to be. And I was feeling a little bit defeated, had a little bit of a self-pity party, and I was able to navigate those feelings with some tips I'll share with you later. And I ended up using a mantra I picked up from Dr. Stein in one of the residencies, and that is progress, not perfection. She was really good about reminding us that this isn't going to be our one contribution to the research and the work, and it doesn't have to be my all being only project I'm ever going to do, and that it's okay to have something still valuable, maybe not what I wanted, because I can always do another one and come back and revisit it. So with those mindsets, I tweaked my project to focus more on the development of the physician peer coaching program itself, in hopes that next steps would be to take it live and then be able to collect data and evaluate the program and move forward. So tweaking my project during this step was a little bit challenging. I went back and revisited some research and focused more on things like learning theories for adults and how to put together effective programming, and a lot more educational articles and research than I had initially done. And it was really helpful. So once that vision of the revised project came together, put everything together and submitted it for final review. A couple of tweaks back and forth, and I was ready to move on to the final oral defense. And as I shared earlier, I was still a little bit nervous presenting, even though I'd gone through quite a journey with my committee and I trust them and I felt safe with them. It's still nerve-wracking to talk and present for that amount of time, for me anyway. And so I took my own advice from my first PowerPoint in the preliminary review, and I tweaked it and made it more interactive. I was able to showcase more research and the findings that I had learned and put into practice some of the things I picked up along this journey. And early this year in January, I had my final oral defense. It went great. It got approved. I submitted my PowerPoint in DSEM, and I was so excited to submit my final manuscript and have it reviewed by the dean and to graduate. That's not what happened. The universe presented me with another opportunity for growth, and I received some feedback that was less than favorable on my final manuscript. And to be honest, my feelings were hurt. I had to take some time to regroup, and I was really questioning if I wanted to keep going, because I was feeling really defeated and a little bit of burnout, and like, I've been working on this for so long, and maybe it's just not good enough. And I ended up taking my own advice, taking some time away from it and revisiting it, because progress, not perfection, and just assuming positive intent, that everybody I've met along this journey has my best interest at heart. They want my project to be good. And to be able to separate that emotion and not take the feedback personal was really helpful. So I came up with a plan and broke down the feedback into doable steps. And that's the process that I'm currently working on now to have it revised again, and why I'm just so close to being done. Some of those challenges I want to revisit and share with you, in case you're like me and maybe you've gone through this, or to potentially be helpful to you if it's something you might be going through in the future, is that during this whole process, I had some life challenges come along the way. I learned a lot about myself and my struggles with perfectionism versus being a high achiever. And although I considered myself an expert on burnout, and that's what I was studying, I ended up experiencing a lot of it myself. And it was really hard for me to admit that, because I'm passionate about school. I love this project, and it's fun. And I was just feeling burnt out and a little bit defeated. So as I touched on earlier, some of those life challenges I experienced since starting my ADP last spring was shortly after I got approved for my coursework to begin my ADP project, COVID hit. And I work for a hospital system. So it was very challenging on multiple levels. I'm a single mom. My kids had just finished school things and both lost their jobs due to the pandemic. I have an elderly mother who is high risk, and just balancing all the challenges, even in the workplace, and wanting to be safe and take care of our colleagues and associates and our physicians. And prior to this happening, I was telling Dr. Stein that I was so jazzed for this project and I had a clear vision. It's going to be easy. I don't want it to take a whole another year to graduate. And I am going to do this entire ADP in one term, not all 5. I was very gung-ho about it. I was very excited. I had my vision board. I had my steps mapped out and I was ready to go. And then I was humbled. And not only was I not able to do the project I had originally set out to do, I had to find a way that I could try to get it done at all, let alone in just one term. So as I was navigating that process and thinking about how could I tweak this project so that it's still doable during the pandemic, it brings value to my colleagues and the literature, and it's something that I could put into practice down the road to help other people. My mother, who I mentioned earlier, is very high risk, and she ended up being hospitalized 5 times this past year, each time taken by ambulance. And it's been really stressful. And we're navigating this space of potentially needing assisted living, but not being willing to, and her navigating all those life challenges and feeling stressed out and just burnt out with being sick. And it was helpful because I was able to take some of the things I learned in my research along the way on burnout and come alongside my mom and support her through this change. And then for myself, I was diagnosed with an unexpected heart condition last fall called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. And it's basically where the electrical messages of the top part of your heart don't go through a channel that's meant to slow them down when they communicate with the bottom part of your heart. So my heart was rapid firing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I ended up needing surgery 2 or 3 days after being diagnosed to cauterize that pathway and heal my heart. So I was feeling a lot of stress and burnout, just feeling really emotionally, mentally, and physically fatigued, and having the chronic stress of, okay, I've been in college my entire adult life. One paper away, I have to keep changing things. Is it really worth it? Maybe I should just take a break. And then on top of that, I've learned that I really struggle with perfectionism. I felt that I was being a high achiever. I liked to balance in what I call multitask or multifunction many things like full-time work, full-time school, full-time kids, full-time daughter, full-time friend. And I was so proud of myself for balancing all of this well, and not really stopping to look at how burnt out I was really feeling and how fatigued I was feeling on every level. And I felt like I just had to push through. And some of the things that show up for us when we're feeling perfectionistic versus high achieving is we tend to have this all or nothing thinking. And for me, in terms of my ADP project, that showed up as it has to be 100% the way I planned. And anything less than that is failure. There was no gray area for me. So having to switch the type of project I did, I really struggled with in the beginning because it wasn't the plan. I had designed it and this is how it was supposed to be. And it just wasn't working. So I felt that as a sense of failure, and it added to my burnout. Another piece is that critical piece. So I was very critical of myself. I am an expert and I'm very great at giving love and support to everyone else. And if you're like me, sometimes I struggle with that negative self-talk and I'm my own worst critic. So I was very hard on myself for missing milestones, for assuming that any draft I turned in was perfect and I wouldn't get feedback because of all the work I got into it. And so when revisions were needed, I was very critical with myself because I thought I turned in something perfect. That led to a little bit of depression and sadness by not meeting my goals. And when burnout really started kicking in, I wasn't motivated to keep going. And I was told in the beginning of my residencies, it's a great idea to just work on it for 10, 15 minutes a day, small steps, big change. And I didn't even want to do that. So I would go several days out of a time without even looking at my project. And then that just compiled my feelings of anxiety about not having it done fast enough, not having it done perfect enough, to not even being able to get it done at all. And I was really starting to struggle. I ended up being pushed by fear towards my goal, instead of being pulled towards it out of excitement and joy. So in the beginning, and what I mean by that is I was really pulled towards my goal of graduating and making this program out of passion and joy and excitement. And near the end during this process, I started being more pushed by fear. Fear that I wouldn't graduate, fear that I would disappoint myself and other people, and really struggling. So I was trying to achieve this goal for all the wrong reasons. And it really impacted my work style, my feelings about myself, and my burnout. And then I also had really unrealistic standards. Thinking that I could do this project in 9 weeks versus the whole year set my bar really high for myself. And so when COVID came along and those life challenges added to that, and I wasn't able to do that standard, all of those other things came in, that critical thinking, my negative self-talk, and that I couldn't do it and I wasn't capable of it. And that led to some of those low self-esteem feelings and really a lack of compassion for myself. It was very hard on myself. And again, I just ended up procrastinating because I was feeling like I wasn't good enough. It wasn't going to be perfect. So I didn't want to touch it, just being frozen in fear. And I was really focused on the results. I wasn't enjoying the journey at all. It was not my field of butterflies and rainbows. I felt really alone and isolated. I'm the only one in my family and friend group pursuing this level of education. So I would get a few, yeah, okay, that's great, and some support that way, but I didn't really get that kind of support, and I became defensive and really struggled with that. And then when I looked at all this burnout overall, again, it was just really hard to be compassionate with myself and to keep going, balancing everything from taking care of my mom, working during the pandemic, and trying to figure out ways that I could use my own advice that I gained through this research to support myself and then to be able to be of value to other people. And the things that really stuck out to me after I revisited everything is from Dr. Stein, for sure, this progress, not perfection mentality, meaning it's great to be a high achiever and it's still going to be good and it's still going to bring value, and to slow down and to gain knowledge and understanding and an appreciation for the journey, and to not be so focused on graduating as the sole purpose. Like, there's a lot to learn and grow from in this process. And I thought it would be really easy and just a checkbox item. As I shared briefly earlier, I really struggled finding more support outside of my committee, and it came in the most unlikely place. A third-party vendor through work and I were chatting before a Zoom call, and I briefly mentioned I was working on my project, and she became my biggest cheerleader. She was so excited. She would call me every Friday and I'd get to report to her everything I had done, and she would cheer me on and dance around the office, and it just made me feel really good. So I utilized and leaned in on that social support. And then assuming positive intent. Like I mentioned earlier, getting feedback is part of the process. It's gonna happen. You're gonna need to make changes, and just assume everyone you're connecting with has your best interest at heart and wants to help you create something really good. And then lastly, being compassionate with yourself. There's some great research by Dr. Kristen Neff that breaks down self-compassion into 3 parts. And I found each of them valuable, and I focus on these when I'm struggling. The first one is acknowledging that you are feeling less than yourself. You're upset with yourself, so just being able to sit with those feelings. The second part is being kind to yourself and showing yourself kindness. And the third, which has been the most valuable for me, is a common sense of humanity and shared humanity. So I'm not the only one who's felt this way, and there are going to be other people who feel this way going forward. So just having that sense of connection is really helpful. And then lastly, finding ways to take care of yourself. There are a lot of parts of this process that are enjoyable, and there are also some things that can deplete your energy with life and the project. And so finding other activities to renew yourself along the way is also really helpful. Oh, I'm thankful. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to share this with you. And hopefully I was able to share some things that will bring you value in the future. And I'm curious to know if there are any questions.
Jennifer, thank you so much for jumping in when we had technical difficulties with another presenter. We're trying to catch up a little bit on time, so I'm not going to do a lot of questions, but I have seen some thumbs up come up. A couple of things that I have. I know this is your story, and it was really interesting to hear it from your point of view. I just want to point out that you changed from a study, from having to collect data and everything, to doing an evidence-based project program prior to doing your IRB. So we caught that. Yeah, we caught that fairly early. And how did that feel to have to let go of that whole thing?
My perfectionism kicked in, and it was really hard because I had a plan. And it was going to be me and my project dancing in that field of butterflies and rainbows, and that wasn't the case. And so it was scary to let go of that control at first. And that's when I really just had to let go and trust the process. And I realized, oh, this might be a bit more of a journey than I thought, and not just a checkbox item. So it was a little bit challenging in the beginning, but I'm thankful for it because I think I was able to create something with a lot of value by focusing more on the project itself.
And those who want to see her program, the training people to be doctors to be peer coaches, it is associated with her ADP, and that's in ProQuest. We had one question as we came up. How did you overcome the imposter syndrome prior to your preliminary oral defense? Kate Johnson says, I think many students at all levels of education encounter this phenomenon.
Yes, thank you. That is a great question. And that imposter syndrome is something I experienced not only in this project, but even in my work life, even in talking with you today. And I get this thought in my head, who am I to be doing this work? What audacity do I have that I think that I can contribute this? And the way I reframe it to myself is I interrupt that thought and I say, who am I not to? I bring value just like each and everyone else, and we all have things we contribute. So just repeating that mantra to myself when that thought kicks in of who am I to be doing this, I just interrupt it and say, who am I not to? And that has been really helpful to me. And then the more experience I have in connecting with my committee and support that I get from peers, it just builds that self-confidence and my belief in myself and the work that I'm doing. And I'm able to fail forward when things don't go my way. I don't take it personal anymore as much. I did when I got that last feedback from the dean, but I'm working on that. And it's just being able to fail forward and take the lessons and assuming positive intent instead of becoming defensive, and to move forward with it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many reviewers there are. So everyone has an opinion, and you just have to work through that. And thank you so much for working through that and coming up with a great project and a great presentation. I do want to read some of the kudos that you're getting here. Dan, I don't have your last name, says, what a fantastic presentation, Jennifer. I would have loved to have heard this kind of insight during my own doctoral process. Dr. Sundstrom, I appreciate your humanity and honesty in sharing your experiences, Jennifer. Mary Sanders writes, Dr. Hudgins, wonderful presentation and awesome visuals. I like the strategies and techniques you've incorporated to successfully reach the end of your doctoral journey. Congratulations for hanging in there to the end. You rock. And Dr. Looney writes, great presentation. I can so relate to so much of what you described. She has a question, but I'm not sure we're able to take questions right now.
Sure. I'm happy to answer your questions if you want to email them to me at jenhudgins@outlook.com and to share more detail, some of the coaching things I developed and used myself. And then just lastly, Dr. Stein, you're right. It was so interesting. If I had known that I would be practicing and experiencing what I researched in my own journey of burnout, I think I would have studied the impact of winning Powerball instead in hopes the universe would have brought that my way instead of all this self-growth opportunity I wasn't expecting.
And that happens so often. Is you start to live what you're studying.
Yes, so
So
thank you. It's been a great process and I really enjoyed all of it. So thank you.
thank you so much for sharing. This is, we have this recorded. This will be so useful for people to hear. So, and congratulations on being this far close to the end,
This
and
close.
we're gonna do it.
We're gonna do it. Thank you. And thank you for
Take care.
listening.